Hi fools, welcome to another video from the Motley Fool. I'm Owen Ben-Alak. Now we're going to look at two banks today. We're going to look at Lloyds Banking Group and we're going to look at Banco Santander. And in some ways these banks have more in common than you might immediately think, certainly from their names. The exotic Banco Santander is unsurprisingly run by a chap from Spain, Mr. Emilio Botan. He is like banking blue blood basically. He's run Santander for decades upon decades. He's nearly 80. And he is pretty much the master, the puppet master almost of Spanish banking. Over at Lloyds Banking Group, you have a chap from Portugal who originally was actually working at Santander. He moved over to the UK to help it integrate Abbey National and acquired that, turned it to Santander UK. Then he was kind of headhunted, I guess, to run Lloyds Banking Group. So there's an interesting bit of backstory there on the two. And actually, when you look at some other things between the two banks, comparing and contrasting, there are a couple of other similarities. Banco Santander, surprisingly, has a massive UK business now. By some measures, such as net loans, for instance, its UK business is as big as business. Obviously, Lloyds Banking Group has a very big UK business, and I think that's where the differences start, because Lloyds is entirely a UK business now, give or take a few little operations. It's pretty much retreated from what it did have in other territories, so now it is completely a bet on the UK economy and the UK housing market. Probably the best single way to play that market that you could possibly get exposure to. Santander still has operations all around the world. It's got a massive emerging markets operation. Obviously it's got Spanish exposure, it's got some exposure in Eastern Europe, Portugal has in the mix as well, has some US exposure as well. And I think that's probably the biggest difference between the two banks is now if you buy Lloyds, you pretty much have to take a view on the UK economy, whereas with Santander, you have to take a view on the global economy, because what's happened is even as Spain, which was obviously a bit of a disaster, even as that has stabilised, unemployment seems to have bottomed out, GDP actually stopped going negative. I can't bring myself to say it's turned positive, but it has flattened. Technically it turned positive in the last quarter. It's now run into problems in South America. Probably read the headlines about emerging markets being in trouble. So what kind of one hand of Santander gives you sort of takes with the other hand. So there's a more complicated picture to evaluate. In the old days, people thought that made these banks more stable. And I think possibly in the future it will. You could imagine in 10 years, say, a UK recession that just leaves Santander more or less unscathed, whereas Lloyds would probably be hit quite hard. So turning to the value that you're paying to get these companies, the price you're paying rather, what value you get. They're both on a P of about 12 to 13 forward basis, depending on which analyst you prefer to listen to. Lloyds is scheduled to start paying dividends, probably about 2p, which is a yield of about 2.5%. Santander is paying a whopping dividend, which is still equivalent, even its shares have gone up a bit, but still equivalent to 9%, so it's obviously a lot better. However, there's two caveats. Firstly, the Lloyds dividend hasn't officially been declared, so it might not come. It's pretty much going to be a dividend. We don't know exactly what it will be. The Santander dividend is not covered by earnings, so they kept paying out this dividend, but it's not actually covered. They issue shares to pay a lot of the people who would receive the dividend basically in paper. That's how I've received my dividend, because if you get the Santander shares, you're also subject to Spanish withholding tax, which you usually can't really reclaim. One of my brokers doesn't even let you try. So I think that that's worth taking into account as well as a UK citizen. In terms of the future for these companies, really, I don't think you'd have to choose one or the other because they're so different. If you want a globally diversified bank and you're prepared to take a bit of chop along the way, Santander probably is quite a good bet at this price. I own the shares still. If you think the UK economy is coming good, you're not too worried about the national housing market, Lloyds is probably a good bet. I own those shares as well, so I couldn't make my mind up. I don't expect you to, but that's kind of how they compare and contrast.